Welcome back to Movie Recaps. Today I will show you a sci-fi, romance, drama film from 2016 titled Passengers. The interstellar spaceship Avalon can be seen traveling through space, headed to a colonized world called Homestead 2. All of its quarters are empty. The vessel is on autopilot, the 258 crew members, as well as the 5,000 Suddenly, the ship passes through an asteroid belt that's weakening its shields. Power is diverted to the main shield, but the ship is on a collision course with a giant asteroid. Suddenly, the asteroid collides with the ship, causing various malfunctions. The ship begins self-reparation. Hibernation pods activates. The passenger awakened is Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens and an automated system helps with his awakening, telling him that he spent 120 years in suspended animation and that the ship is only. He's told that he will be able to spend that time enjoying the luxurious aspects of the ship. Jim receives instructions about his ID band, his cabin, and the primary activities he's to take part of prior to the arrival on the plane. Excited and nervous to meet the people on the ship, he gets ready, leaves his cabin, and walks into an automated class mat for an entire learning. Jim looks a little anxious, as the hologram explains the situation on Earth, calling it overpopulated, overpriced, and overrated. It tells him to hold his questions to the end of the lesson, but he realizes that the hologram can't answer him and goes to search for other people. He gets to the main concourse of the ship. No one is there either, but an automated informational desk off. Jim asks to talk to a real person, and it sends him off to talk to a steward. But when he finds that no one is there too, he asks the captain. When he gets to the bridge, even though he doesn't have access to go inside, he can see that none of the main crew is awake either. Jim eventually goes to the observatory, where he finds out that the ship is actually 90 years away. He realizes that he woke up too soon, so he rushes back to the concourse and sends a message back to Earth asking what he should do, because he doesn't know how to get back into hibernation. The communications system informs him that the overpriced call to Earth would take approximately 55 years to get an answer back. Jim is devastated. He walks around and finds the ship's bar. To the bartender, something seems strange about him. When he goes to get him a drink, Jim realizes that he's an android. Jim wants to find out more information from him, but he can't even explain to the android how it's possible for him to be there ahead of. Jim wakes up in his cabin the next day and goes to the cantina, where he quickly realizes that most of the things on the menu are reserved for gold-class passengers only. He gets his plain coffee and tries to figure out how to fix. After he gets all the tools, he manages to get it operating inside of the pod, but nothing happens. Next, he decides to use the tools he found to get into the crew's hibernation chambers. That doesn't work either. Small malfunctions happen. Jim keeps returning to the bar to drink, but mostly to talk to Arthur. The android gives him some advice that convinces him to break into one of the gold-class rooms and Jim tries all the restaurants, the games, the entertainment system. But as time passes, he becomes even more miserable to be there alone. One day, he gets drunk and wanders around the hibernation pods. When he stumbles into an airlock with spacesuit, Jim gets into a suit and goes to the airlock, pushes a lever and then the button to release the airlock door. Once outside the ship, he's mesmerized by the view. He's the only conscious human being experiencing that moment. Jim releases the magnets on his boots and floats in space, feeling devastated. Inside, takes off the suit, but goes back to the airlock without it on. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, but changes his mind in the last moment, runs back inside. Jim stands up and is instantly drawn to a woman in one of the pods, named Aurora. He searches for her files in the directory and listens to her passenger interview, becoming enamored with her. Later, he's seen sitting next to her pod, back in the bar. He's reading some of her work and is talking to Arthur about her writing. He becomes obsessed with the irony of his situation. Another planet for a better life, waking up early and not getting there, and finding his perfect woman, only for her to be out of reach. Jim keeps thinking about her and starts getting the idea. He talks it over with the android, but he doesn't understand the conundrum. If he wakes her up for his own benefit, he'd be stranding her there with him, to die on the ship. Jim decides against it first, but as time goes by, until one day, he changes his mind. He goes to her pod and manages to activate it. As she's waking up and going through the same process, goes back to his room. A little bit later, he goes to the main concourse, hoping to find her. And there she is, just as confused as he was a year ago. Jim tells her then he tells her that he can't get to neither the crew nor the main commands of the ship. Aurora freaks out and wants to get back. When they get to it, Jim explains that there is no special equipment on the ship that can help them get back into hibernation, effectively telling her that they go back at the concourse, and he tells her that she should rest, since she just came out of hibernation. She feels sorry for him, having to spend a year alone on the ship. Jim goes back to the bar, feeling regretful about what he did. He asks Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one that woke her up. The next day, Aurora wakes up. She goes back to the concourse and asks the automated info desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her there and they go to get breakfast. As they leave, the info desk has some sort of... In the cantina, Aurora realizes that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for more than a year and gets him one of the gold-class menus. They talk about the possibility to fix the pods, but Aurora isn't ready to give up. She searches through the infirmary, then goes through research documents, eventually ending up at the crew's hibernation quarters, trying to break the doors open. Jim notices more malfunctions throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora laments. She writes, jogs around the ship and swims in the pool, becoming more and more aware of her situation. She goes to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking that his story might be interesting. She asks why he immigrated to the colony. Jim answers with slogans from the company first, but then further explains that he hopes that on the new world he could be somebody. Later, they end up in the observatory and Aurora finally shares her reason. Unlike the other passengers on the ship, she has a round-trip ticket. Her idea was to go to Homestead too, live there for a year and come back to Earth, to become the first journalist that has ever done that. Aurora slowly gives up on finding a way to fix their current predicament, and Jim figures out a way to cheer. He takes her dancing, to the movies, and to the bath. Finally, he takes her to the bar to meet. She relaxes for a moment until she remembers their situation. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling terrible about what he did. The next moment, he's seen tinkering with something, and Aurora walks into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building. Later, they go on a date at the bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. She tells him her father died when she was a teen. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock, and they put on the spacesuit. They go out for a spacewalk together. Jim finally has someone to share that amazing experience with. Jim switches off the magnets on their boots, and they float together. They come back inside and immediately kiss, retreating to his cabin. Soon after, they start living like a... Aurora moves into his cabin and writes about her life on the... They jog together, eat together, and sleep. Jim explores the ship further and finds the hydroponic. He brings Aurora flowers. One day, the ship passes by a red giant, and they go to the observatory. It's Aurora's birthday, so later that night they celebrate in one of the many restaurants on the ship, and Jim goes to the washroom and prepares the ring he made for Aurora, while she chats with Arthur at the bar. The android tells Aurora that Jim woke her up on purpose, not knowing he was supposed to keep that a secret. Suddenly, Jim comes back, and she confronts him in disbelief. She runs away. Jim returns to his cabin to find all her things. He runs into her in the cantina the next day, but as soon as he speaks, Aurora is dead. One night, she goes to Jim's cabin, punching and kicking him, talking to her over the comm because she keeps avoiding him. Jim tries to apologize and explain his act. He tells her he fell in love with her, but Aurora doesn't. She can't forgive him for taking her life. One night, while Jim is in his cabin, another malfunction. The ship faces a critical error, and the main command. Later, he walks into the elevator, and it malfunctions. Aurora walks into the main concourse and sees that Jim has planned. Then, she goes to the cantina, where the food dispensary. Suddenly, both of them hear the deck chief's voice over the comms, asking. They both run into the concourse and see Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim. They introduce themselves and explain the situation to. He doesn't understand how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge, where he discovers something is wrong with the ship, but the systems need to be checked. When they leave the bridge, a robot almost falls on them, and they tell Mancuso that malfunctions have been happening all over the ship. He says that shouldn't happen as he shows them how to collect the data. Mancuso checks on the pods when Jim joins him there. He's figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief finds Jim's actions terrible. Later, he's at the bridge checking the collected data when Aurora joins him. They talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her he can't do anything. Jim walks in with the 16th Mancuso feels the hibernation sickness, so he goes to rest. But as he walks out, that night, Aurora can't sleep, so Suddenly, gravity is lost throughout the ship, and she starts drowning as the gravity drive resets, and she barely makes it out alive. They both run into each other while looking for Mancuso. The three of them are back at the bridge, slowly discovering what's been happening. Mancuso figures out that something happened 2 years ago, taking out They need to find and fix what caused the failure because the entire ship is trying to compensate. If they don't fix it, the whole vessel will be. They go to find the problem, but Mancuso faints, so Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary. He's dying, and there are no treatments that can stop it or prolong his. Later, the three of them meet in the observatory, and Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, telling them to fix the ship before he. Suddenly, the lights change to alarming red, and the ship. Jim tells Aurora he needs her help, and they run toward engineering. But there's another failure in the gravity. And immediately, another one that affects Jim deactivates him. They finally arrive in engineering and start looking for the problem. They find it in the power plant, and as they open the hatch, Aurora, the asteroid has caused a breach in the hull in that. Jim gets sucked in too, but he holds onto the hatch as it keeps closing on. Eventually, he gets sucked in too, but they quickly. Instantly after fixing that problem, Jim realizes there is more than one. The two of them follow the trajectory of the meteor and find it has hit the reactor. Jim thinks he can find replacement parts for it. They find the part and change it, but the process of venting the reactors. They do it manually, but it fails. Jim figures out he needs to open the vent door from outside the ship to cool the reactor down. Both of them go to the airlock, and as he's getting ready to go out, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet. She helps him with the suit, and as he walks into the airlock, she tells him to come back because she can't live on the. Aurora goes back to the reactor, where the temperature has reached. A bolt from the reactor propels into her arm as Jim gets closer to the vent from the outside and sees the door. The temperature rises in the reactor room, while he tries to bypass the vent door to open it. He soon realizes he'll have to manually hold the door open so the reactor can vent. She doesn't like the plan, but he goes ahead with it and tells her to vent the reactor. She doesn't want him to die, and they argue, but he tells her they have to save the others. The process is successful, but the fumes from the reactor push Jim away and break. The pressure in his suit is dropping. He tells Aurora what happened, and she moves as fast as she can to get another suit and bring him. He apologizes to her again. She puts on a suit and flies out to get him, but her tether is too short. She's pulled back but suddenly grabs onto his tether and manages to pull him. Aurora drags Jim into the infirmary, only to find out she uses Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols and resuscitate him. The medical pod does the work automatically and revives Jim. Aurora forgives. Later, Aurora fixes Arthur, and they give Mancuso a proper. Jim takes her to the infirmary and tells her he's found a way to use the medical pod as a. He tells her to get inside the pod and ride out the rest of the journey in there. But as is later revealed, she declines and decides to stay with him. Jim finally proposes to her, and they live out their lives on. 88 years later, the Avalon arrives at Homestead. The crew wakes up and finds the ship in a very unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, retelling the story of the life she and Jim had on the ship. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.